Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to look at something today that might just completely change your daily routine. We usually think of language learning as this tedious high school requirement, right? Or maybe that thing you frantically try to do on an app a week before a trip abroad. But what if I told you that the absolutely most compelling reason to learn a new language has literally nothing to do with ordering a croissant in Paris? We're going to explore the incredibly surprising neurological and health benefits of language learning and exactly why picking up a new language might just be the ultimate workout for your brain.
But hey, first, we've got to acknowledge the elephant in the room here. With all these instant translation apps out there, why even bother? It's a totally valid question. We live in a world where that smartphone in your pocket can instantly translate live speech. You literally just hold your camera up to a foreign menu, and boom, you're reading it in your native tongue in a split second. So, the purely communicative need to learn another language, it's shrinking, and it's shrinking fast.
Which brings us to Section 1, the Universal Language Paradox. Let's look at this massive shift happening in global communication right now.
So on the one hand, English is practically taking over the globe. It's the language of the internet, global finance, air traffic control, you name it. Even in countries like China, you have dozens of universities now teaching entirely in English. But on the flip side, linguists are predicting that by the end of this century, the vast majority of the roughly 6,000 languages spoken today are going to go extinct. We'll literally be left with just a few hundred. So if the whole world is converging on one language and software can basically handle the rest, seriously, what's the point?
Well, some folks argue that you should learn a language because it gives you this totally different worldview. Like in French or Spanish, the word for table is feminine. Does that mean French speakers actually view tables differently? Well, linguist John McWhorter impartially points out a pretty big flaw in this mystical idea. Just think about native English speakers for a second. People like Bono, Donald Trump, and Kim Kardashian, right? What unified worldview do those three people possibly share just because they happen to speak English? The answer is, they don't. Language doesn't just hand you a completely different pair of glasses to view the world through.
But what a language does give you is the actual code to truly experience a culture. McWhorter points to this fascinating Canadian film called Jesus of Montreal. In it, there are these vibrant, super passionate French-Canadian women who are forced to speak English in a hospital setting. And because they're processing their thoughts through a language they just aren't fully comfortable with, these incredibly colorful characters suddenly become husks of themselves. They're like shadows. The takeaway here? To truly imbibe a culture and connect with its people authentically, you just can't process them through a translation screen. You really need their code.
But moving beyond just culture, we arrive at our core thesis for today. Section 2, Brain-Boosting Health Benefits. This is all about health and cognition.
Now, what's really interesting to see here is that the sheer power of these clinical health benefits is absolutely staggering. Learning a language acts as a lifelong cognitive workout. Studies show it can actually delay the onset of dementia. And because of all that mental juggling required, it turns you into a much better multitasker. Plus, our brains just absolutely love novelty. So when you learn a new language, your brain rewards you with this amazing dopamine release. And perhaps most importantly, it provides this deep, ongoing sense of purpose that can actively fight depression.
To kind of ground all these clinical facts, let's look at Daria Zaykovskaya's incredible story. Back in 2020, she found herself locked down in a tiny one-room apartment. To stay sane, she desperately needed a cheap indoor hobby. So what did she do? She literally flipped a coin a few times and it landed on learning Finnish. Armed with nothing but YouTube and a few apps, she just started learning. And this incredibly simple act gave her a profound sense of purpose. It actually helped pull her out of lockdown depression. And get this, within months, she was so hooked that she was applying to a university in Finland.
So let's see exactly how the brain gets stronger through all these mental gymnastics in Section 3, Rewiring the Bilingual Mind. It's literally about rewiring your brain. Daria has this great analogy. She compares the monolingual brain, someone who only speaks one language, to a beautiful music box. You turn the crank, and it flawlessly plays its one embedded tune. It totally does the trick, but it's fixed. The bilingual brain, though, that's more like a dual cassette tape recorder. You constantly have to take one tape out, put the other tape in, and hit play. It requires active, continuous mental effort.
But why exactly is it like a tape recorder? Well, because in a bilingual mind, both languages are always active at the exact same time. The brain is literally competing with itself. So to speak your second language, your brain has to constantly and actively suppress your native language. And it's this constant switching, this mental resistance training that builds up your cognitive flexibility over time. You're basically adding brand new keys to your mental piano.
And honestly, the sensation of this mental workout is pretty amazing. John McWhorter describes the feeling of encountering different word orders or grammar as being like the sensory tingle of witch hazel around your eyes. It just jolts your brain right into awareness. Imagine mastering the unique, kind of backwards-feeling grammar of Mandarin Chinese, or rolling around the 30 different vowels of Cambodian in your mouth like bees in a hive. It's this incredibly satisfying, almost tactile mental experience.
All this mental effort leads to what Daria calls the Satsuma victory. Here's the story. She had learned the word Satsuma, which is a type of citrus fruit, from watching a British TV show, even though she'd never actually used it in real life. But later on, seeing that exact fruit labeled in a supermarket abroad, she felt this immense, crazy rush of pride. Our brains just love to achieve things, right? And language learning gives us these small, totally non-competitive victories every single day. You aren't trying to beat anyone else. You're literally just racking up daily dopamine hits by understanding the world around you.
So, how do we actually make this healthy habit stick without just completely burning out? For that, we turn to Section 4, the Polyglot Prescription. This is all about building the habit. Language mentor and polyglot Lidia Machova actually interviewed hundreds of people who speak multiple languages to find out their secret. And what she found was this incredibly consistent four-step methodology. Polyglots are not these mythical geniuses with a magical language gene. They simply follow these 4 steps: enjoyment, effective methods, creating a system, and patience. Let's break these down real quick. Okay, step 1 is enjoyment. You have to ditch the boring textbooks. I mean, nobody actually wants to read artificial dialogues about asking for directions to a train station, right? Instead, use materials you genuinely love. Lydia herself learned Spanish by reading Harry Potter, just because it was her favorite book. She learned German by watching the sitcom Friends. Now, at first, it probably sounded like pure gibberish, but because she loved the show so much, she kept watching until the dialogue just magically started to make sense.
So the crucial point is the most powerful method polyglots use to actually make this effective is something called spaced repetition. If you just cram words from a list, they sit in your short-term memory for a bit and then completely vanish. Spaced repetition means you're reviewing vocabulary at increasing intervals over several days. You can use apps like Anki or Memrise, or even write lists in a notebook using what's called the gold list method. But basically, this is the scientifically proven way to force those words deep into your long-term memory.
Step 3 is to create a system. Look, none of us have extra time just lying around to study a language. The trick is tying your learning to your everyday habits. You don't need to block out an hour of quiet study time. Instead, try doing a bit of self-talk in your target language while you're doing household chores. Or maybe listen to a foreign language podcast during your morning commute. The secret is to weave the language directly into the life you are already living.
Which brings us to the glue that holds all of this together. Section 5. Building a healthy habit. It all comes down to patience and practice. To really illustrate this patience, let's look at Benny and Lucas, 2 of the polyglots Lydia interviewed. Benny speaks 10 languages today, but his method, it requires immense patience. He fearlessly aims to make 200 mistakes a day speaking with native speakers online, using all that feedback to grow. Then there's Lucas, who learned Russian by adding 100 random strangers on Skype. He would literally copy-paste greetings between 2 different strangers, letting them talk to each other through him until he finally noticed the patterns and could type the responses himself. I mean, how clever is that?
Now, you might think Benny and Lucas are just naturally gifted, but actually, they both spent over a decade in school being absolutely terrible at languages. Lucas's friends even gave him a Russian textbook as a gag gift because he was notoriously the worst student in the class. The true miracle of the polyglot isn't some innate talent. It's just taking learning into your own hands, using materials you actually enjoy, experimenting with new methods like Skype chats or spaced repetition, and tracking your progress so you can actually see those small victories pile up.
So at the end of the day, language learning isn't just a school subject you have to suffer through, and it certainly isn't made obsolete by translation apps. It is a lifelong, entirely enjoyable exercise regimen that literally rewires your brain, protects your cognitive health, and fills your days with these tiny dopamine-fueled victories. You are literally just one enjoyable method away from a healthier, more flexible brain. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. Which language will you choose today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.